Hi there. I wanted to take a little time today to talk about unconscious grief and bring that to our attention a bit more. This is something that we work with quite a bit here at Merkaba Heart. Um, we do a variety of different grief rituals and supporting people through the grief process. And part of this is really bringing the grief to light. A lot of us are just going through our day being rather affected by grief that is underneath the surface, running below in our unconscious, in our subconscious, and when we're not aware that that's what we're working with, it is allowed to just kind of wreak havoc on our lives, and that might sound a little dramatic, but it's quite true. There's a lot that we push down and a lot that we don't give space for and don't really process. And this starts off when we're very young. Our lives, the human experience is one of loss. There's a lot of suffering and loss, and that's just part of how it works. And change, a lot of change. We're constantly changing and growing and evolving, and that's just what we do, and that's fine, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I don't think that we've really been set up to work with this in a very healthy way. We desire things to stay constant, and we're it's kind of enforced in our society. Just the way that the systems are set up are really about creating stability for ourselves and finding our path and our job, our career, and what school we're going to go to, what family we're going to have, or who we're going to marry, how we're going to have kids, what we're going to do, where we're going to go, how we're going to raise them. And this is all set up as just like, the American dream. This is what, according to some people anyway, it's what we've been fed. And there is this trajectory of how a life is supposed to go and what it's supposed to look like. And when things don't work out that way, or when things are very different from that, we suffer. We suffer because that's what we've been told is the normal thing, and what we're supposed to do, what we're supposed to want, how we're supposed to be. And that's part of our systems, part of the limiting belief systems, the constructs, the societal expectations and norms that we've all grown up in. So when things don't go according to plan and they don't fit into this neat and tidy little box that we've been given, there's a lot of suffering that comes along with that. So and we just kind of push it down and keep moving forward because it's not supported to really go into that and really honor that the grief that arises from and the emotions that arise when there is change, when there is loss, when there is transition, when things don't go according to how we wanted them to. And this can be at very many different levels, whether it be more smaller life changes and transitions, or really big ones, like death. Maybe somebody in our family dies. That is a huge change and nothing that anybody ever plans for and hopes to experience. But it does happen. It's part of our life. It's just what it is. So how do we work with that? And oftentimes it's just not held and supported in our society to grieve, to really go into that. There's no space allowed. There's no time allowed. If somebody in our family dies, for those of us that are in like a normal, there's that word again, in a job, a typical, let's say typical, not normal, typical job. Maybe there's 3 days allowed for grieving, when a family member dies, 3 days. And then you have to go back to work. And maybe it's even a couple of weeks. But that's a huge, huge transition. And then we're supposed to get back to life as usual and just kind of carry on. And, how do we work with that? That's, we just kind of have to shove down our emotions. Something like that can take years to work through, and we're never over it. Grief is not something we get to the end of. It's just an ongoing path. It's an ongoing part of our human experience. So, and again, at varying degrees, grief for me personally, my biggest grief and loss was being adopted at birth, losing my biological mother and my family and all that ensued after that. And certainly no space for grieving. People didn't even understand that a baby could grieve. Why was I crying all the time? Why was I so angry growing up? I was hurt. I was grieving. That was hard, and definitely not recognized, definitely not supported, and really pathologized. Actually, the grief that I was working with was definitely pathologized. Something was wrong with me. Put her on some medication and quiet her down. Get her to calm down. That was kind of the view. So part of why I understand now why I'm so passionate about grief and supporting people through grief, because I had that such deep experience, coming in. That was part of my path, and getting that deep understanding helps me to appreciate how that works for people, how that works in our human experience, and the effects of that grief when it doesn't go recognized, when it doesn't go supported, when it isn't allowed to move through. And that's the big part, when we stuff this grief, when we tamp it down, when we don't allow ourselves the emotions, when the emotions aren't supported, because oftentimes we don't even know, in some instances, like for me, when I was a baby, I didn't know that I was needing to grieve or that I needed to move emotions through. There's no consciousness there around that. I had no idea. So it was all stuff down. And then it comes out sideways later on down the road. It wasn't pretty. Luckily we moved through and here we are. But, that's what happens with the grief when we go through transitions and we don't honor the process. We don't hold space for ourselves. Society doesn't hold space for us. It's not supported. We stuff it. And we numb out through various different ways, whether that be maybe like eating for nourishment to comfort ourselves. Overeating is a big go-to to support us. Watching TV or too much screen time, getting lost in that kind of a fantasy world, anything to distract us from our own pain. Any work, we can pour ourselves into work and get lost in that, so we don't have to work with our pain and grief. We can get into unhealthy relationships. There's so many ways. Drugs and alcohol is huge. That's a huge thing. Prozac, we're a Prozac nation here. Antidepressants. Don't grieve. Don't show those emotions. Here, take a pill. That'll fix it. Tylenol, all those kind of painkillers, any sort of depressant things to keep us from feeling. And then that shows up in our body, in our physical body. All of these things end up manifesting for us physically. They manifest for us emotionally, even if we're numbed out, that it's a different type of emotion. We can act out emotionally, to have immature emotions because we haven't fully processed them and worked through them. The thought patterns can be really negative and unhealthy. We can be very easily stressed and anxious. So it's there's so many ways this comes out, and just unhealthy relationship patterns, because if we're numbed out and we're not working in a positive, healthy way with our emotions, we're certainly not going to be relating to others in a healthy, positive, nourishing way. You can't numb out the negativity without numbing out the positivity. That's just how it works. So when we go numb, we numb out everything. So our experience of the world is very tamped down and very limited, and we tend to keep ourselves in a little box that helps to keep us safe, so we don't go through more loss. If we keep ourselves small, we don't have to run into more loss, more taking on more emotions that we can't work with. So there's so many ways that this grief, unconscious grief, shows up for us. And, some of it's very conscious. So if somebody dies, we know, like, okay, we're grieving, there's that. But then there's all the other ways, the losses that happen throughout our lives. I'm thinking right now of sexual abuse that so many people are dealing with when they're oftentimes young and helpless and not able to, not strong in their power yet, just taken advantage of it at a young age. There's so much loss around that. There's loss of trust, there's loss of innocence, there's loss of self, there's loss of and that's taking on the energy of another person, taking on their anger and their fear and their rage. So it's a loss of our power, our beauty, our joy, our essence, our effervescence. So then there's that grief, and then it goes on to not being able to be in healthy relationships with others because we're so traumatized and in so much pain, and we haven't been able to process that. So, and even if we are able to process that, there's deep wounding that happens around those kinds of situations. So that's kind of more of a traumatic experience. But then there's other things like moving to new locations, moving a home, the dreams that don't happen, loss of dreams. There's a lot of grief around that when we have plans for our lives that don't manifest as we want them to. That can be, we can get into some real bitterness and anger and resentment and sadness and loneliness and fear. A lot of emotions around that too, and that's one that we might not really recognize that we're grieving, because it's kind of a slow process as we start to let go. We start to let go of our dreams because we start seeing like things aren't happening the way we want to, and then maybe it's just easier, like, okay, so I'm not able to pour myself into my artwork like I thought, so now I need to go work at this other place and not do what's really nourishing for my soul. So, but maybe I'm gonna in the evening still work on my art. So kind of still holding on to that, but then the more time spent, the more energy put into this other kind of job, we have less energy for the dream. And then we just kind of slowly lose ourselves over into this kind of societal thing, expectation, this 3D world, trying to just pay the bills and get by and feed ourselves, take care of those 3D needs, that we have. And so there's loss there, and there's grief there, and then we shut down, and there's disappointment, and we can get real bitter and real and then we can start numbing out too, with all the ways that I talked about previously. So there's grief there. There's grief around changing careers. There's grief around relationship changes. There's grief around maybe your children have grown up and there's a real change in the dynamics there, between the parent-child relationship of when your child was younger, and now the child is older, and it's a very different dynamic. So maybe you're grieving that and not recognizing that how much grief and loss there is around that. So it's just change. It's constant change, and we don't necessarily recognize it as grief. I know from working with grief and working with people that a lot of times the idea of grief is very connected to death. People don't recognize that they're grieving the loss of other things if it's not a death-related loss. So another thing that, as I was talking there, came to mind is grief around the environment, grief around all the species that are becoming extinct right now, grief around so much due to COVID. We've lost... There's been so much change around that, and I know that some of it is very beneficial change, but that doesn't mean there's not grief related to that. I can see the big picture and feel very positive about all the changes that are happening, but that doesn't mean I don't grieve the loss of previous ways of being. So that's a really important key point. Like, even when we can see the bigger picture and we can be in positivity and hold a larger view of the universe is benevolent and everything happens for a reason, and there's great purpose and meaning in all of this change that's happening. Even when there's death in our lives, there's great meaning and purpose in that, and it's part of our path. It's part of what we chose to come in with. Just because we can hold that larger view and have that understanding doesn't mean we get to bypass the very human experience of grief. of grieving, of mourning, of loss, of sadness, of sorrow, of anger, of rage and bitterness. When we don't honor those feelings, when we try to spiritually bypass and go around to just this bigger meaning, that's when we run into problems. There's because the emotions are there, they're real, they're part of our experience, and we can't negate them, we can't avoid them, we can't move around them, we can't just pretend that they're not there. We have to give space to those emotions. We have to honor them, and we have to support them, and we have to allow them to move through. And when we recognize them and work with them in a healthy way, in a conscious way, holding both, like, yes, there's a lot of grief and loss here, even though I understand that that's part of life and there's great meaning and purpose to it. I have to work with it at this level as well, and honor that for myself, and honor the sadness and the anger that, about all the things that are happening right now. So I just wanted to come on here and talk a little bit about that, and what, an importance of raising consciousness around that, and really honoring our process and recognizing it, and not shaming it, not shunning it, not trying to, again, like I said, skirt around the issue, but just like owning it, honoring it, recognizing, yeah, there's pain, there's grief, there's sorrow, there's sadness, there's loss. How do I work through this? How do I move through this? How do I allow myself space to move these energies and nourish myself and support myself through this? We here at Merkaba Heart are really passionate about offering grief ritual and holding space for people, just creating containers for people to go into their grief and just let it move through, because that, like I said earlier, this grieving process is never, it's never ended. It's part of the human experience. And the more that we learn how to work with this and honor this part of ourselves, the healthier and more vibrant we will be. We don't have to stuff it down. We don't have to pretend it doesn't exist. We don't have to be all love and light Pollyanna, because that's not the human experience. We are here. We chose to be here in these human bodies. We chose to have these human lives. We chose to go through this process. And how do we do so in a healthy way for ourselves? Honoring all of the parts, the light and the dark, the beauty and the sorrow, because it's all opposite ends of the spectrum. It's that polarity. There's this, and there's both, and it's all of it. That is the human experience. So yeah, there's holding space for it, creating containers for us to just honor it and recognize it. It's like I said, it doesn't mean we're going to be done with it when we get done with, our rituals, or, these containers. Like, we're not over it when we leave the building, but we have allowed it to move through. We've honored it. We've recognized it. We've given it space. We've given it, space to move through, and we've held each other through it, and we've recognized each other's grief. We've recognized that it is part of our experience, and there's nothing to be ashamed of, and there's nothing to fear, and there's nothing to hide. And it's a beautiful part. It really can be, and it teaches us so much compassion and empathy. Grief can be a great catalyst for growth. It helps us to really recognize the beauty and have so much gratitude and appreciation for so much of our lives. And that's a really interesting part of the human experience. Like, grief and loss is part of it. It helps us to appreciate the other parts. It's an interesting thing, and I don't know why it works that way, but that's what it is. So the better that we can work with it, honor it, and find healthy ways to process it, the better off we are, and the more we're able to, like, we don't have to numb out anymore. We can just fully embody, like, all of it. Embrace it, love it, nurture it, care for it, experience it. And then we can really be in joy and love when we can allow the grief to move through. We don't have to hold on to it. The other part that I meant to touch on earlier is when we hold that grief, when we hold the anger, when we hold the rage, this is where all the disease comes from. This is why so many of us are just really working with unhealthy bodies, weight issues, addiction, um, not feeling good in our bodies, just really, really disconnected from our bodies, and really in a lot of disease, because we're not allowing this stuff to move through. So we're packing it in, we're carrying it, we've got this armor, we've got our shields, and this stagnant, stuck, blocked, angry energy, that's inflammation, is what that is. When we don't allow it to move through and don't do things to support that, we carry it in our bodies and it wreaks havoc. The sadness and sorrow and dread, that depression, that heavy blanket that so many people are carrying around, just like, ugh, it's because it hasn't been allowed to move through, and that's what, again, the grief ritual, energy healing, sound healing, it really works with all of these things, bringing awareness and bringing consciousness, talking about it moves it through, that's energy. Speech is energy. And again, why these rituals, why we come together in a community to grieve and to support, because moving it through, the energy through talking about it, moving it through our all of ourselves, energy, body, physical body, mind, and spirit. When we move it through, we don't have to carry it anymore. We don't have to hold it in our bodies. We get healthier. Our minds clear up. We get off the medications that so many of us are on. We start eating healthier, and our bodies get happy, and then our minds are happy, and then our emotions are happy. We can let it move through. We can let it move through. We can let it move through. And then we can just really, enjoy our life and connect with each other and have this beautiful, vibrant experience of being in this human body that doesn't have to be so sorrowful, And again, when we start holding space for each other, we can connect at so many different levels and have so much more compassion and empathy for each other, and just have a much more beautiful, rich, full connection with each other when we're supporting each other, when we're not numbed out. So that's where we're coming from and what we're really passionate about working with. So we're diving into it even more. So much has risen to the surface with COVID and what's going on with the world, and so much working with awareness around intergenerational trauma, ancestral trauma, inherited trauma, collective trauma. That's what all of this is. We're holding on to it. We're holding on to this so much in our bodies, our minds, our spirits. It's heavy, heavy, heavy stuff. And we are just super passionate about supporting the movement through bringing the awareness, talking about it, having the discussions. Let's start working with this. Let's start recognizing it, owning it, releasing it, energy healing, sound healing, ritual, nutrition, powerful ways to work through all of this and move it through and move it through and move it through. So that's what we're doing here. And thanks for listening. Like and subscribe and follow us on our channels. We're doing things. We're getting ready to. We've got a big unveil coming up here with some real powerful grief work that we're going to start getting into. And we're really excited about that, traveling the country and holding space. Let's all get into this. Let's all release this grief. Let's clear it. Let's clear it from our physical bodies, from our energy bodies, our minds, our spirits, from the planet, from the collective. Let's release. Let's release. Let's release. Let's do some powerful healing here. So, we have a bunch of healing sessions and programs and monthly offerings, community events. Check out our website for much more information about how to start working with this energy in a really powerful way for yourself, how to really move your healing forward. Wherever you're at on this journey, if you've been doing healing for a long time, healing work, really working with your energies, then you know how powerful this work is. If this is new for you and it's resonating and you're like, yeah, I see a lot of this in myself and I'm ready for, to take it to the next level and just to get some support around this and really start diving in, reach out. We are here at many different levels to really support you in your process and support your healing. We have a lot of tools. We've got an amazing energy body booklet on our website that you can download with lots of ways to start working with your energy and start clearing these grief energies, traumatic energies, anger energies, from your experience. And yeah, we have the monthly events, just all the things that I just said. So and feel free to reach out if you have any questions and want to connect. Again, like and subscribe, comment, whatever, however this is moving you. We look forward to connecting with you and supporting you on your journey. So thank you so much for being here. It's an absolute pleasure. We are all just walking each other home. That's my favorite quote from Ram Dass, and it just really, to me, encompasses everything. We're all in this together. We're all here to support each other, and we all, really want the best for each other. I think. I mean, that's where I'm coming from. I want to thrive. I want you to thrive. I want everybody to thrive. I want this beautiful world that's filled with love and beauty and powerful human beings, strong in our power. So that's what we're doing. That's where we're coming from. And thanks for being here. We look forward to connecting with you much more.